Welcome to D&D Builds, where we have an outlet to make all sorts of ridiculous Dungeons & Dragons builds, and hopefully stop driving the people in our lives insane with them. Today we're building Link from The Legend of Zelda. If you like Dungeons & Dragons, make sure to subscribe. I release tons of Dungeons & Dragons content, so if you subscribe, hopefully you won't miss out on any of it. And special thanks to my patrons who make all of this possible, and they get access to character sheets, Discord, and even the opportunity to have a D&D session DM'd by me. Link from Legend of Zelda was requested multiple times in my last video, and since I always try and read as many of the comments as possible, I had to listen and make sure I built this out. There have been tons of different iterations of The Legend of Zelda over the years as you play as Link, so we'll try and cover our bases with pretty much all of them, except for maybe a few outliers. First things first, we gotta pick a race, and that's pretty easy. He's got pointy ears, he likes to live in the forest, so we're gonna go with a wood elf. Elves don't need to sleep quite as much, which might not quite fit with some of the Legend of Zelda stuff, considering it seems like he's sleeping through half the series, but still we can't ignore those pointy ears. Elves also get dark vision, which is super helpful to have as you're crawling through all of those dungeons. Also with the elf race you get keen senses, which gives you proficiency in the perception skill, which is always useful to have in any D&D campaign. And elves have a bonus to their dexterity, but wood elves have an additional bonus to their wisdom. And lastly, being a wood elf, you also get a little bit extra walking speed, bringing you up to 35 feet. As far as a background, it really just depends on which version of The Legend of Zelda you want to go with. If you want to go Wind Waker, I would say go Sailor. If you want to go Ocarina of Time, I'd say Far Traveler as you're traveling through time. Otherwise, I would just go with Folk Hero because it seems like the tale of Link and The Legend of Zelda has taken on a life of its own, and that's what folk heroes are all about. As we decide on where to allocate the stats, we're going to keep Link pretty well rounded. You need strength to be able to use a Goron sword, Master Sword, or that big ass hammer, and you need dexterity to be able to use your hero's bow. So we're going to put 14 points into strength, 12 into dexterity, then get another +2 from being an elf, bringing that to 14. Put 14 into Constitution so you can take a few hits, making sure that you have plenty of hearts to use. Put your Intelligence at a respectable 12 so that way you can solve some puzzles. And then bring your Wisdom up to 13 and get another +1 from being a wood elf, just so you can better understand the world around you. Then we're going to completely dump Charisma because it's not like you ever say a single word. Now let's pick a class. Link has been known to use a variety of different armor and weapons, so we need something that has access to all the weapons and most armor, but we don't really see him wear heavy plate armor very often, so we can probably ignore that. He does have some ability to use some magic, either with magic attacks, special moves, or being able to charge up your weapons with elemental power. That, plus his ability to forage the wilderness and deal with animals, I think it's only natural that we go with a ranger. When you select a ranger, you get access to light and medium armor and shields, so you can use the Hyrulean shield. You get access to simple and martial weapons, and you get saving throws in strength and dexterity. Then finally you get to choose 3 skills on top of whatever you got from whichever background you chose. The 3 skills I would choose are athletics, so that way you can jump around a little easier, animal handling, so that way you can deal with riding Epona, and then finally go survival. That way, just like in Breath of the Wild, you have a little more ability to cook. We'll start off with the leather armor tunic and some standard weapons before you get your Master Sword. At first level of Ranger, you get to choose a favorite enemy, and I would choose Humanoid, because usually you're fighting against Ganondorf, and unless he's in his pig form, he's usually more humanoid. Also at first level of Ranger, you get Natural Explorer, but Natural Explorer is totally focused on how to help your group, and usually Link travels alone. So we're going to use the optional substitution here and go with Deft Explorer instead. This essentially gives you expertise in one skill, so I would go ahead and give Link expertise in athletics. That way you can do plenty of rolling, hopefully without bonking into a wall. At second level of Ranger, you get a fighting style, and there's plenty of options here depending on what type of Link you want to be. But frankly, with how iconic the Master Sword is, I would go with dueling. The dueling fighting style makes it so that way when you're swinging with a one-handed weapon, you get +2 bonus to damage rolls with that weapon. Also at this level, you get access to some spell casting, so we get 2 spells. I would choose Hunter's Mark, that way you can access the lock-on targeting that was made so prevalent in Ocarina of Time. Then after that, I would grab Animal Friendship. It's a spell that lasts 24 hours and doesn't require concentration, so this can be a great way to make your bond with Epona, your horse. At third level of Ranger, you get Primeval Awareness. This allows you to expend a spell slot to get a sense of the creatures around you. Just think of this as your mini-map. Also at third level, we get a subclass of Ranger, or a Ranger Conclave. I'm sure there's arguments that could be made for Swarm Keeper to deal with annoying ass Navi, Gloomstalker or Horizon Walker for the whole high rule, low rule thing, or dealing with the Twilight Realm and Twilight Princess. But really I think it comes down to Hunter or Monster Slayer, because you're usually taking on crazy monsters all by yourself. I have a personal preference here and I'm definitely going to let it shine. In early levels, Hunter is better than Monster Slayer, even though a lot of people like Monster Slayer more. There's a bit more versatility with Hunter as you get to choose particular paths as you go along. Monster Slayer does have a feature later on that is better, but most campaigns aren't going to make it that high anyways. So I would definitely go Hunter to start. When you choose the Hunter Conclave, you get to choose a Hunter's Prey feature. You get to decide between Giant Killer, Horde Breaker, and Colossus Slayer. I think the absolute best choice here is Colossus Slayer. You're constantly going up against enormous monsters, and Colossus Slayer really helps. With no spellcasting or concentration or anything, Colossus Slayer allows you to add an additional 1d8 of damage once per turn when you hit a creature with an attack, as long as it's below its hit point maximum. We can play this off as your first attack is just kind of trying to figure out your enemy, and then after that you find those magical little glowing spots to attack, giving you that slight bit of boost to your damage. At 4th level you get an ability score improvement, and we're going to go Stranger here, also known as a Strength Ranger, since we're focused more on melee combat. You do use your hero's bow on occasion, but your primary weapon is your Master Sword. And a Master Sword is definitely going to be a long sword, which is more of a strength weapon. So we're going to boost our strength by 2, bringing it to 16. At 5th level you get an all-important extra attack, which is definitely needed for any martial class. And additionally, you get access to a 2nd level spell slot. And since we do have some additional spells to choose from here, I would make sure to grab Magic Weapon. That way you can charge up your sword and be able to swing it around just like Link does. Finally, making use of your magic meter. At 6th level you get to choose another favorite enemy, and considering we already have humanoids covered, I would just go with Beast, because that's usually the other thing that you're fighting. Your Deft Explorer also gets an improvement, increasing your walking speed by 5, bringing you up to 40, which is pretty fast when it comes to D&D, and you gain a climbing and swimming speed equal to your walking speed. And this is super helpful because we have tons of Zelda games where Link is doing plenty of swimming, and especially in Breath of the Wild, there is plenty of climbing. At 7th level, we get another feature from our Hunter Conclave, our Defensive Tactic, and we get to choose either Escape the Horde, Multi-Attack Defense, or Steel Will. But considering that you have the Triforce of Courage, we're going to go Steel Will. This gives you advantage on all saving throws against being frightened. And that's pretty much the definition of courage. At 8th level we get another ability score improvement, so we're going to bump our strength up to 18. Unless you feel like you're really suffering on the amount of heart containers you have, then you can boost constitution, but personally I would go with strength. You also get access to Landstride, making it so you can move throughout difficult terrain that's not magical with no extra movement. And giving you advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically created, such as things like the Entangled spell. At 9th level you get access to a higher level spell slot, and you can choose a few more spells to know. I would definitely grab Protection from Energy, which will give you resistance to one damage type of your choice. That way we can recreate which tunic you're wearing and get resistance to cold, fire, or any elemental damage. Then I would grab Elemental Weapon. This will allow you to charge up your arrows with a particular type of elemental damage, and you can choose fire or cold. Granted, you could also choose flame arrows here, but they don't have a cold arrow, so I think this works a little better. You could also grab lightning arrows, since there isn't really a great way to recreate a light arrow, and lightning arrow is pretty damn powerful, so this might be the best substitution. Granted, another person in your party could give you access to Holy Weapon, but I think this is best if you're going at it alone. And the last spell I would make sure to grab is Water Breathings, so that way you can recreate what it's like to wear the blue tunic. Then at 10th level you get your choice between Hide in Plain Sight and Nature's Veil. Hide in Plain Sight is the original version given to Rangers, and Nature's Veil is a bit of an improvement on that. Nature's Veil gives you the ability to use a bonus action to magically become invisible. But since stealth hasn't really been a massive part of many of the Zelda games, instead I'd probably stick with the original Hide in Plain Sight. It still gives you some sneaking around ability, but nothing too intense, and that's a little more closer to what Link does. It allows you to camouflage yourself a little bit, as long as you have access to some natural things around you, coating yourself in some fresh mud or dirt, going full on Arnold Schwarzenegger versus the Predator style, and if you can pull this off you gain plus 10 bonus to your dexterity stealth checks. And lastly at this level you get a boost to your Deft Explorer feature, giving you access to Tireless. As an action you can give yourself some temporary hit points, which is really like chomping down on just the right meal in Breath of the Wild. At 11th level you get another feature from your Hunter Conclave, and this is all about multi-attack. While many rangers that stick with a bow and arrow go with volley, we're going to go with Whirlwind Attack. This is super spot on for when you charge up and spin around with your sword. And if you mix in the spell Magic Weapon on top of it, it's really like you're charging it up with magic. It allows you to make a melee attack against any number of creatures within 5 feet of you, completely spinning around with your sword. You have to make an attack roll against every single one of them, but the dueling fighting style that we chose earlier gets to apply to each one of those. So if you're completely surrounded by enemies, you get +2 damage to each one of them. And if you casted Magic Weapon ahead of time, you can turn that into a +3. At 12th level, we get another ability score improvement, so we're finally going to max out our strength. So now you can really swing that Master Sword, or the Goron Sword, or that massive hammer, or whatever the hell you want. Then at 13th level, you get access to a higher level spell slot, and here's where we're going to get a little tricky. One of the most iconic items in the Legend of Zelda series is the hookshot. There's not really a whole lot of great magic items that can replicate this. So instead, we're going to rely on this level of spell slot and get Grasping Vine. Grasping Vine doesn't actually do any damage, but you can cast it on any unoccupied space within 30 feet of you, and then it can reach out and grab a creature, pulling it 20 feet directly towards that vine. So this is a perfect way to replicate the hookshot. You just cast that Grasping Vine wherever you want to anchor that hookshot, and then just reaches out and grabs you, and you can use it to swing. At 14th level, you get another favorite enemy to choose from, and by this point in the Zelda series, you've probably come across a handful of ghosts. So I would choose Undead, because whether you're going up against zombies or ghosts or pose or whatever, that's pretty much the last consistent enemy that you run into throughout the Zelda series. Also at 14th level, you get access to Vanish, which allows you to hide as a bonus action. And also you can't be tracked by any non-magical means. I guess this kind of plays into when you're sneaking up on some enemies in Breath of the Wild or sneaking around certain dungeons. At 15th level, you get another feature of your Ranger's Conclave. If we had gone Monster Slayer, this is the one feature that I think would be better on Monster Slayer than it was in Hunter. That being said, we chose Hunter, so we're going to stick with it, giving us superior Hunter's defense. And you get your choices between Evasion, Stand Against the Tide, and Uncanny Dodge. Uncanny Dodge will be great for backflipping away from an enemy, but personally I think Evasion just happens to work a little better. It might not fit quite as well with the class, but it's just so much more useful as far as the build, so I can't help but go with it. It gives you half damage on anything that you'd have to make a dexterity saving throw against, and if you save on that dex save, you take no damage instead. At 16th level, you get another ability score improvement, so I'd finally boost up our heart containers a little bit and boost our constitution. Then at 17th level, you get access to a higher level spell slot. The two spells I'm going to focus on here are Steel Wind Strike and Swift Quiver. Swift Quiver is going to be great for when you pull out your bow mid-air and things slow down a bit, giving you additional opportunities to fire your bow. Because while this spell is active, you can make 2 additional attacks as a bonus action while utilizing any weapon that uses ammunition. And Steel Wind Strike is all about when you rush in and slash at people in Breath of the Wild. At 18th level, you get Feral Senses, and this is just like getting that magic eye lens thing in Ocarina of Time, giving you the ability to sense invisible enemies around you, so they no longer impose disadvantage on attack rolls you make against it. At 19th level, you get another ability score improvement, so we're going to boost up our constitution one more time, giving you a few more heart containers. And finally, at level 20, you get Foe Slayer, which allows you to add your wisdom modifier to any attack or damage roll you make against any one of your favorite enemies once per turn. Granted, we didn't focus a ton on our wisdom since this feature comes in so late in the build, but it's still a nice little boost to have, giving you a +2 to either your attack roll or your damage roll. And since the overall build is complete, let's focus on a couple of the magic items and see how we can replicate them in D&D. The Master Sword and Hyrulean Shield are very straightforward. They're pretty much any magical weapon or shield that you would come across. We talked about replicating the hookshot with Grasping Vine. Boomerangs aren't all that uncommon in D&D, but they especially have a Storm Boomerang if you really want to go overboard with it, which is found in the Princes of the Apocalypse adventure, and everything else is pretty much dependent on which game you choose. You might be able to find a magical maestro stick or a magical ocarina, but I can't avoid thinking about the strength enhancing gauntlets from Ocarina of Time. And they actually have gauntlets of ogre power in D&D. They make it so your strength is at least 19, so this is going to be helpful earlier in your build rather than later. They also have items like the Belt of Giant Strength you can pair with it, which would boost your strength even more so, but I would focus more on the gauntlets as that's a bit more true to the games. The only other consistent item that I really wanted to find but had some trouble with were the Iron Boots. If anybody out there has any idea where I might be able to find that in D&D, Let me know in the comments down below. I think this overall build covers the majority of Zelda games, except for maybe a few random exceptions. Like if you wanted to be able to turn into a giant wolf like in Twilight Princess, I would throw in a couple levels of Druid, so that way you can turn into a dire wolf. A Link Between Worlds might be a bit more of a Horizon Walker Ranger. And if you just so happen to want to go as Dark Link instead, you could always go Gloomstalker. But otherwise, I think this build is pretty spot on. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, if there's anything you do differently, or any builds that you want in the future. I try and read as many of those comments as possible. If you want access to my character sheets, Discord, additional insights behind the scenes, feel free to check out my Patreon, and you can be just like these incredibly awesome, badass patrons that I have. They help support me, and I cannot thank them enough. But if you can't contribute on Patreon, it still helps just by subscribing, that way you don't miss out on any future D&D content. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here hoping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, 1 for each one of the Triforce. But especially if you're playing as the Triforce of Courage, Link.